Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Au Pair Freedom, the channel where I answer the question, how does gendered work impact international flows of labor and exchange? In this episode, I will discuss how countries in Europe regulate au pairing by looking at two main groups, Nordic countries and United Kingdom, because these countries are the most popular destinations for au pairs working in Europe. First, I would like to discuss au pairs in Europe broadly. Au pairs require clarification and recognition of their legal position as workers, entailing that they earn normal wages, receive extra compensation for overtime, and have proper protection against dismissals that are against their contracts. To achieve this clarification, the regulation for domestic workers has to be updated to uphold a better balancing of rights between employers and domestic workers so that when things go wrong, au pairs have redress that does not end their contract. And the International Labor Organization's Domestic Workers Convention extends some of the most basic and fundamental employment rights that other migrant workers are entitled to domestic workers. The question of whether or not an au pair will be included in the provisions was intensely deliberated. ILO constituents opted to treat the au pair relationship as an exception to the definition of domestic worker in the new international standard. Now, some of the key rights that should be highlighted are to ensure that domestic workers in member states have access to daily and weekly rest periods, and this includes at least one period of 24 hours rest each week, are paid a minimum wage, and can choose a place where they spend leave and rest periods. All three of which are mentioned in the European Agreement of Au Pair Placement discussed in episode 2 of the channel. The big issue is that the Domestic Workers Convention has only been ratified by 30 countries, only 6 of which are European countries. The other remaining member states to the International Labor Organization are not bound to the recommendation of the convention. The states that ratify the convention in practice should help au pairs know about their basic rights and where to get help should they need it. Now, this is seldom accomplished due to the fact that countries have historically used au pairing as a solution to find a more flexible and cost-effective childcare option, rather than taking more transparent approaches such as sponsoring state-funded childcare, reducing working hours, and addressing the consequences that unequal distribution of child labor has on women specifically. Next, I'll be discussing how Nordic countries regulate au pairing, beginning with Sweden. Now, contradictory rules and regulations concerning domestic work renders the au pair market as largely invisible, which makes it difficult to analyze the true scope of this market. Now, the Swedish au pair market is divided amongst au pairs from the EU and those from outside the EU. Au pairs from outside the EU have to obtain a work permit and are counted in the statistics of the migration agencies. Au pairs from the EU do not require a work permit and they are not counted in any databases. Now, the contradiction of au pairing lies in the requirement of au pairs from outside the EU to obtain a work permit, but at the same time emphasizing that work in this case is set apart from regular work that is conducted by other migrant workers. Now, unlike other Nordic countries, Sweden is not a signatory to the European Agreement on Au Pairing, regulating au pair work in Europe. The argument for not signing the agreement was that the EU Domestic Work Act provides better legal protections to au pairs than the European Agreement on Au Pairing. To give a little bit of background on the Domestic Work Act, this was passed in the 1970s and constitutes that all au pairs are legally considered workers. However, the Act does not require written contracts, allows for required overtime without consequences to the employers, and allows dismissals without causation. Sweden expected that labor unions would inform domestic workers about their rights. However, the case is very few au pairs are aware or even concerned about the acts, and therefore there is no collective regulations of wages and working conditions. The regulation of au pairs outside the EU through the Domestic Work Act violates the rules stated in the migrant agency's work permit, which highlights how cultural exchange is included in the main principles for regulation. Now, this creates a bit of a gray area in which au pairs are part of the labor market, but at the same time, they are also not part of it. One thing that both the Act and the work permit have in common is that no written contract is required for au pairs from outside of the EU. While some families downplay the importance of contracts, others insist on providing signed contracts so that the expectations are made clear, as well as to leave room for further conditions to be added. Now, the contract places pressures on au pairs to stay for the entirety of their contracted period by threatening that the compensation be paid to the host family if this demand is not carried out. Now, many times the host family's right to privacy takes precedence over the working conditions of au pair because the work is done in the residence of the host family. and this justifies weaker employment rights for au pairs. With the emergence of Sweden as a welfare state, the formerly unpaired care work performed by women was transferred into paid work that was legally regulated by Sweden. Now I'll discuss Denmark. Denmark celebrates the Danish nation state and Danish host families and their capacities helping the poor, single au pair, and her country of origin. In addition to having Europe's highest monthly allowance for